So without further ado, please join me in giving Zach Mercurio a purposeful Broad River welcome.
All right. Wow. I'll tell you what, for someone who researches purpose, looking out at a group of people all wearing t-shirts with the topic that you research is literally like a dream right now. It's like, pinch me, I'm in a dream. Charlie had mentioned that you all are miracles, and it reminded me, I'm a researcher, so it reminded me of some research that just came out of this little place called Harvard, where they know some things, apparently. And it's by this doctor, he's a medical doctor named Ali Benazir. And he did a study on the chances of humans biologically existing in their current form. What's your name? Joe. So the chances of Joe being Joe. And what he looked at was, what are the biological chances of your biological parents, meeting times about 10 to the 40th power, since the beginning of time, and that lineage of your biological parents, whole lineage being unbroken since the beginning of this planet that just so happens to be the perfect distance from a star that can support everybody you ever knew and will know. What's the probability of that event happening? And then the anthropologist got involved on his team and started thinking about all of the Earth and the chances of every encounter happening to create those biological relationships that created you. And researchers have found that the likelihood of that happening, of you even being here, is about 1 in 400 quadrillion. 1 in 400 quadrillion. And that's a underestimate. Think about that. I mean, that should dramatically change your alarm clock tomorrow, if you believe that. I mean, we should be waking up being like, holy crap, I'm alive. Like, I'm walking on a planet. I'm breathing air. You should be like, there's other humans in this room right now. Like, that person next to you is that person. If you do 1 in 400 quadrillion times 120, the probability of this event happening is unbelievable. That's why when I get to do this type of work, every time I go into a room like this, I'm like, this shouldn't be happening. But it is happening. So it is an imperative. See, I used the word. It is an imperative to ask this question. Why me? Why here? Why now? Why me? Why here? Why now? And the answer can be one of the most compelling motivators of human beings. And so I want to start by asking you a question. And I want you to think about the last 7 days of your life. And I want you to think about the time, the moment in which you experienced the greatest sense of purpose. Whatever purpose means to you in the last 7 days, which moment has given you the greatest sense of purpose? And what I'd like for you to do is to think about it, but then just share it with the person next to you, and then I'll bring us back in like a minute or two. So go for it. All right, let's bring it back. What did you notice about the moments you heard or shared? What did you notice?
Joy.
Smiles, joy. Yeah, a lot different than when Charlie was reading my LinkedIn bio, right? All of a sudden, people started coming alive. There was like, joy. You saw people leaning in, a lot of people smiling. What else did you notice?
Thought.
What was that? Thought? Yeah, tell me more about that.
A lot of introspective thinking about what has happened to you in the last 7 days that you're recognizing.
Yeah.
That drives you to do what you do each day, or what drives you through every minute of that day, and why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, a lot of thought. You start thinking more intentionally about the last 7 days, because the last 7 days, it's like, what happened? Where am I? Who am I? It's like we move at this pace of life where we do a lot of things, and oftentimes we don't pause to ask why. What matters? Yeah.
It was created in a moment, and there is a lot of
Yeah, it was created in a moment. Purpose happens in moments. Moments of meaning, moments of mattering. We're going to talk about that a lot today. Yeah.
They're authentic.
authentic. Yeah, you feel it. You can sense it in the room. Yeah.
The purpose always included other people than just yourself.
Ah, interesting. So how many of you all, your moment or the moment you heard had to do with another person? Raise your hand. How many of you all, your moment had to do with achieving some goal or working towards something bigger than yourself? Good. How many of you all, your moment was when you got your direct deposit? Or when you got a promotion or got the new job title or your sales goals or quotas or results or all those things, right? This is very common. What we know in the research is one of the prime motivators of human beings. In fact, the only predictor, statistically significant predictor of internal motivation, that is the energy to do something, since we've been studying this since the early 1950s, is that to be motivated, to experience energy, we have to know that what we're doing matters to another human being. And you just proved it again. When I say this sense of purpose, almost everybody in every room I've ever talked to talks about contribution. And it's recentering on what purpose actually is, which is contribution that's important. Because right now, purpose is a buzzword. It's really hot in every industry. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's theorizing about it. There's a Forbes article every minute about how you need purpose. And I fear that we can get too convoluted and theoretical about it and forget what it actually is. I was on the flight down here, and you'll never guess what happened to me. People ask me what I do all the time. I help people research how to build purpose into their lives and work, so it's a little difficult for me to answer that question, and it's a terrible question. But I'm an introvert, so I get on this flight, and I have a radar, introvert radar, non-verbally. Is that person going to talk to me for 3.5 hours? And I sat down. This guy sitting next to me says, "What do you do?" Immediately. I said, "Oh, I help people build purpose into their work." And he goes, "Oh, gosh." He was the CEO of a big manufacturing company. And he goes, "I'm so sick of hearing about purpose." That's the reaction I get a lot of times in my work. And I said, "Well, what does purpose mean to you?" And he goes, "Oh, it's just fluffy branding stuff." And I said, "Well, tell me about a time where you felt a sense of purpose." He goes on to talk about this time where he was experiencing this moment with his son, and he was transcending himself and contributing. I said, "That's what purpose is. Do you want your people to feel that?" And I think that we forget that purpose is contribution. So today, what I want to do is bring it back to that, bring it back to the practical aspect of what it means to be purposeful. So being purposeful then, if purpose is contribution-centered thinking, being, and acting. Charlie talked about habits. There are 3 types of habits. There are habits of thinking, there are habits of being, how you show up, and there are habits of doing, how we do things. Purposeful people and purposeful leaders think, be, and do from a contribution-first mindset. The result is that you feel the things that you felt when you were sharing those moments. The result is that other people feel those things that you felt when you were sharing those moments. And so today, I want to get into a couple things. The first is I want to talk about really what purpose is again and how it works, the science of purpose. Because the best way to be a purposeful leader is not just to understand that purpose works, but is to have a deep understanding of how it works to compel yourself and other human beings so that you can activate it. The second thing I want to do is make this practical and talk about the 3 research-backed practices of purposeful leaders. So what do people who do think, be, and are and do from a contribution mindset, what do they do every single day? What are their habits? And we're going to get into some skill building where we'll learn to activate this for other people. And so to introduce you to this topic of purpose, I need to introduce you to my only employee because he's taught me more about purpose than any research I've done or organization that I've worked with. There he is. This is Tapley. He's the best part of the presentation. And he's also my 3.5-year-old, well, 4-year-old now. And I have a home office and a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, so my life is peaceful just all the time. And I was doing something that was really routine for me. So in life, we get into these routines. My routine is taking my research and my work, turning it into content that can be useful to people. So my routine was I was creating a PowerPoint, sort of tinkering with this PowerPoint, trying to create all the statistics and data on the slides. And I realized that, I was pretty burnt out for like 3 months of going through that routine. A person who studies purpose and meaning got burnt out, right? Because it happens to all of us. sometimes the good work can become routine work without a little toddler running in your office. So he comes into my office one day, and I'm just working on this PowerPoint, and he says, Daddy, what are you doing? And he's asking me what I'm doing no matter what it is that I'm doing, even though it's obvious what I'm doing now. And he says, what are you doing? And I said, I'm working. And he looked at me, and he said, why? And I said, oh gosh, I'm the why person. I should be asking this question. But I was like, I was struck in that moment. And for the first time in 3 months, because he asked that question, I thought about you, right? The people that would be in the room. And I said to him, I think these people really like what I have to say. I tried to put it in his language. And he looked at me again, unsatisfied with that answer. And he said, why? And he scurried out of the office. And I had an existential meltdown. I was like, why am I doing this? But he reminded me of a couple of very important things about purpose. The first is that we're wired for it. As soon as we learn language as little human beings, and if you've either been around a toddler, if you haven't, you were a toddler once. That's a mind-blowing thought experiment to look around. Everybody was a toddler at one point. We are wired to ask that question. Sociologists and anthropologists find that in every language across the globe, the language equivalent for why is one of the first words our brain is encoded to ask to make sense of the world. Psychologists call that our seeking system, and that seeking system never goes away. So we may get in educational paths or get into jobs that tell us what to do and how to do it and reward our worth based on what we get for what we do. But that seeking system never goes away. For everybody you work with, that brain, that part of the brain that seeks the answer to why is there, it's in there. Organizations that reawaken that question for people, that very primitive, basic human desire, are more successful because they're able to create the environments where people can start activating that seeking system again. Whereas in most of our lives, we're defined by what we do and how we do it. In purposeful organizations, people are defined by what they give and why they are. And it's incredibly powerful to reawaken that. So we're wired for it. The second thing he taught me in that moment is that question's really annoying. Like, I'm not going to lie, my whole occupation is just to collectively annoy people. It's really annoying. And why is it annoying when people ask why of us? It's annoying because when people ask why, we have to explain ourselves. We have to justify our existence. Why should Broad River Retail exist in 5 years? Why shouldn't Charlie let it fail? Why shouldn't we all let it fail? Who needs you? How would the world be different if you weren't here? My toddler asked me, why are you spending your incredibly rare existence doing what you're doing? I had to explain myself, justify. The research finds that when we can answer that question and give that explanation in a clear way every single day, it's one of the most profound motivators of people and human beings. I want to show you how this works, how stating a bigger purpose works to create the storyline of our lives and work. And so I'm going to put an animation up on the screen. There's no sound, so nothing's broken. But I want you to watch it really quickly. And I just want you to ask yourself, what's happening here? What do I see happening here? So take a look. Judging by your facial expressions, some of you are like, what is literally happening in this room right now? Anybody have any ideas of what just happened?
Like one angry person chasing two other people and they're trying to save themselves.
Yes, what's your name?
Missy.
Missy, can you say that a little bit louder?
I just seemed like there was an angry person chasing two other people.
Angry person chasing two other people, and they were trying to run away. So an angry person's chasing two other people, and they were trying to run away. Thank you, Missy. Who else think they know what happened here?
It was chaos. There was no organization, and it looked like they didn't know how to work together.
Chaos, disorganization. They didn't know how to work together. Good. Yeah.
They both wanted the circle, but instead of one of the triangles was being really nice about it, and the other one would rather be mean and angry and fight for it versus working together.
Wow, you should write a book. That's like complex. What's your name?
Chelsea.
Chelsea. So there's like fighting going on, conflict. They both wanted the circle. They were fighting over the circle, and then things just got out of hand towards the end. How many of you all thought the big triangle was bad in some way? Anybody think the big triangle was bad? Who thought this was some sort of a metaphor for something? What did you think?
Well, I noticed that the smaller objects, they left, and he was left by himself, and
Yeah.
the whole thing broke.
Yeah, he was left by himself, and the whole thing broke apart because he was lonely, maybe. So here's the actual story of what actually happened here. And the answer is absolutely nothing. Nothing happened. These are two-dimensional black shapes moving randomly on a white screen. And you're like, no way, it was a bullying scenario. Or our novelist is probably like really upset. But nothing happened here. Social scientists are the worst because I just did a psychological experiment on you without your consent. But nothing happened here. This is a classic 1944 psychological experiment by these two psychologists named Hyder and Simmel. What they did is they had some research assistants come up with a random flipbook animation of shapes. And they went and showed it to 400 people, and they said, what do you see happening here? 398 of them, there's always a couple that are like, nothing's happening here. 398 of them said that there was some sort of emotionally compelling story going on. I mean, look what happened in this room. In an instant, it's called blink theory. Your brain made meaning out of chaos. All of a sudden, look, we gave that a gender. If that's not a man triangle, I don't know what is. Like, all of a sudden, there was intention, like a bullying scenario. That thing sprouted legs and was chasing people around. It was angry. It was upset. There was a storyline. Our brains, your stakeholders' brains, your employees' brains, everybody's brain is wired to find purpose in the chaos. This study's been replicated every decade. Our brains are wired to find purpose in the chaos. All life and work is a bunch of stuff that's happening to us and around us. Our brains make meaning out of it, and we're yearning for that meaning. Now, I want to show you how stating a purpose works really powerfully in life and in an organization. So if I were to say, hey, these are kids playing in a park. Watch this. What do you see happening here? What might change about your interpretations? Yeah, they were annoying the big triangle. Some people may talk about a playground, a bullying scenario. But the key is that all of a sudden, in a second, just a second statement, I can contextualize everybody's meaning-making structure and sync it up in this room, just like that. Like all of a sudden, I put bounds on it. I say, this is what's happening here. This is the bigger storyline. And all of a sudden, you take the randomness and you fit it into the storyline. When we don't have a purpose, what happens is randomness. We just react to things. Like I often tell people, they say, oh, I met with this stressful person today. No person is stressful. Your meaning-making structure makes them stressful. We have control over our meaning-making structures. And so when we can contextualize our life with a bigger storyline, which is our bigger contribution, the shapes, things start taking shape. We call that harmonized energy. I find in organizations that time after time that one of the biggest sources of conflict is not that people don't know what to do or how to do it. It's that they don't have a shared belief in why it matters. They don't have a shared belief in the storyline. I find that true with people's lives. When people are just reacting to things and feeling down and they go from one thing to the other, they don't have a shared belief. They don't have a belief in why they matter, why they are. Purpose is the grand storyline of our work and our lives. And when we state it clearly and consistently, it's powerful. And we know through worldwide research that people since the mid-1950s have been searching for purpose and meaning in work. Why? People will spend up to 40% of their waking lives at work. If you're a leader in any company, I often say that we should redefine leadership as you're responsible for the environment in which people spend a large portion of their waking lives. Human beings who have lives as vivid and complex and important as your own. If you look at every person that you interact with every day and you just say this to yourself, they are me. It can change everything. Every customer, every employee. People are searching for purpose and meaning. There was a study done in 1955. Some people say, Zach, well, you look like a millennial. Millennials want purpose. And I say, it's not a generational thing, it's a human thing. In 1955, these two sociologists surveyed people across occupations. All they asked was, if I were to give you a big lump sum of money, would you continue to work? Over 80% of them said at some point they would continue to work. Why? Because they said that work is one of the only places besides family or other organizations in which you are able to work together with people toward a bigger purpose. That's the power of this place, right? Is that the invisible thread that ties all of your unique stories together is furnishing life's memories. That's the invisible leader of this organization. The #1 rank globally across every continent of what's most important to people at work is a sense of self-realization. You know, you all saw that quote. I mean, potential is limitless. Self-realization and meaningfulness. Going back to that first question, does what I do matter? Is it significant? And then we know that people would take lower pay for more meaning. That's been researched since the 1960s. And so I want to give you an example of purpose in action from my research. I study people who are on the front lines of work, janitors, mechanics, bus drivers, how they come to experience purpose and meaningfulness in their work. One of the first interviews I ever did as a PhD student was with a university janitor named Mary. And I was going into her office to do this interview. She had worked herself up to a supervisor position. She had been with the university as a janitor for over 25 years. She was one of the most fought over people on campus to get her to clean in their buildings. And I go in and I knew that she had retired recently, about 4 months prior to this interview. And I was really excited for her. But as I'm going in, her former boss catches me and he goes, Zach, I just want to let you know Mary came out of retirement. She's going to be a janitor level 1 again. So I go in, and not being a good researcher, I just said, Mary, why? Why would you come out of retirement? And she looked at me, and her answer changed my whole course of research. She said, Zach, I was sitting at home, and I could not stand the thought of those kids in those residence halls, those dormitories, not having a mama figure away from home. I couldn't stand it. Purpose was such a powerful psychological force that it literally pulled her out of retirement to do this job that's socially stigmatized, that people think is dirty work or oftentimes degrading work, to do that again, to do that work again. She said, I realized very early on in my career that a janitor position would not exist at a university if I wasn't an educator. That's what she told me. So she said, I am part of that. I clean toilets, I vacuum the hallways, that's what I do, but why I do it is to make sure those students can graduate. And I asked Mary, I said, why did you get the job in the first place? She goes, to put food on the table, to get a paycheck, right? She wanted to get a paycheck. That's a result of the job, not the purpose of the job. She saw the purpose of the work, and she told me, that's not why I wanted to keep coming to work, though. I may be here for a paycheck, but that's not why I want to keep coming to work. And to give an example of what Mary did when we do thousands of interviews like her to build purpose into the work, is she made sure she connected herself to the human beings that she served. For example, every janitor at the university has to vacuum the hallways, right? It's just something you have to do. It's your what. Mary, instead of just going about the task sort of aimlessly, at the beginning of every semester she would knock on everybody's door and she would say, hey, I'm Mary, I'm your janitor. What's your class schedule? She would make a mental note of people's class schedules, and she would schedule vacuuming for when she could see the most students and talk to the most students. That's an example of job crafting, of crafting your work to make sure the purpose is front and center all the time. Those are some of the strategies we're going to go over today, of what we've learned from thousands of people like Mary and how we can stay connected to that purpose. And that's called being purpose-oriented. So being purposeful, you can have a purpose and not be purposeful. All of the research on the benefits of purpose is when that purpose becomes activated, as Charlie said. We find that people who are purpose-oriented are 4 times more engaged in their work. Engagement is just code word for pride and enthusiasm in the work. Now, you don't have to be a researcher with write a book to understand that Mary comes in every day. Mary knows she's an educator. Fred comes in every day. Fred's there to get a paycheck. They both face the exact same stressful situation at work. You don't have to be a researcher to know that the response to that stressful situation is going to be different for Mary, because that's part of her being an educator, versus Fred, where it's just he's there for the paycheck. That's what we see time after time when people are purpose-oriented. It's the number 1 factor in job satisfaction. The second, a far second, is quality of leadership. So having a sense of purpose and being purposeful can even mediate bureaucratic and systemic issues. People are more likely to be promoted when they're on purpose. The National Institutes of Health just released a longitudinal study that found, after studying people, over 3,000 people for 40 years, controlling for every risk factor and genetic predisposition, that they found that people who had a sense of purpose, on average, lived 7 years longer, had a 23% reduction in early mortality events, and were healthier. We don't know why or how quite yet, but we know that there's a correlation between purpose and health. We're more likely to learn something new every day and be content. One thing that I want you to do is to think about this whole day. Before every session, just ask yourself, instead of being like, oh, what's this person going to say? Or when's the next purpose pause? Ask yourself, how can what I learn in this session help me make an impact? Because if you ask that session and think about who, like bring a person to your mind, think about their face, think about them, and say, how can what I learn help me make an impact? If we train our mind to ask that question, we become different and better from a learning perspective. I want to give a couple of examples of the science of purpose, of how purpose actually works, before we get into some practices and having you all think about some things and do some things. Anybody a running fan in here? There's always like 3 or 4, and then someone always gets like pointed out. Oh, it's you. I'm a fan of watching other people run, but I get bored driving 26 miles, so I can't imagine running 26 miles. Wait, does anybody run a marathon?
Yes. Christian's training for it.
Christian. That's amazing, Christian. Christian should get a prize just for that. But this is Desiree Linden. She's the women's winner of the Boston Marathon in 2018, and she gives us an unbelievable example of what happens when we're on purpose scientifically and neurobiologically. So if you look at this, you'll see the raindrops here. This is 40 degrees in Boston, side-swept rain, 26 miles running, ideal running conditions, right? No. It was horrible, miserable. The cameras caught Desiree Linden about 3 or 4 miles into the race. She was off, getting sick off the course, had to come back on. And she made a decision that she was going to be done for the day. She was probably going to drop out. It wasn't her day. And she said she was going to probably drop out at about mile 10. I would not have done a 10-mile jog. I would have been having a coffee and a donut somewhere. But apparently that's what elite runners do. And that's when she made a decision about a mile later that she said changed everything for her. She saw a group of runners that was in the front, the elite group of runners. And she thought to herself, I wonder if they need anything. It's tough out here. She went up to them and she said, hey, if you need anything, let me know. I'll grab water cups for you. I'll block the wind for you. I'll draft for you. Let me know. She said that within about 2 miles after she stopped thinking about herself and started contributing, she miraculously got her legs back. She went on to win the Boston Marathon. This dramatically disrupted and disturbed Desiree, because if you know anything about elite athletes like Christian, they know that it's a science. The process, the inputs into your body, what you do to your body has a specific predictive output. But she said in an interview with Runner's World magazine that she could not, no matter what training she ever did athletically, physically in her life, she has never had the result that thinking about a broader purpose had on her in that moment. She started talking to everybody about this. NBC News, her sports psychologist, she just couldn't figure it out. And UCLA Semmel Center for Neuroscience got involved and said, it's not surprising. We find that there's a part of your brain, my brain, our brains that's wired for altruism. We are hardwired for contribution. We wouldn't be here if we weren't. And so when we do contribute, our brain rewards us. It's called the happiness trifecta of neurotransmitters called dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. These are literally the neurochemicals that control for mood, movement, and motivation. In other words, we're suboptimal neurobiologically when we're not on purpose. So this happens when we do two things. When we think about our contribution, like Desiree did, or when we actually go out and help another person, we become different and better. And that's one of the reasons why purpose scientifically works, is that it focuses us on contribution. And so as purposeful leaders, recentering people on their contribution, do they know that they matter and how they matter, is critical. The second way purpose works is that purpose predicts resilience. Angela Duckworth, who's a researcher, wrote the book Grit. I highly recommend it. She also has on her website a grit scale, and you can self-assess how resilient you are. I'll warn you, it's quite depressing. I scored like a 2 out of 5 on my resilience, but I encourage you to go out and do that. But she researched thousands of people, and what she found was that one of the greatest predictors of resilience, and grit is like those people, you know those people that they just get up and keep going. No matter what life is thrown at them, they just keep going. One of the biggest predictors of grit and resilience is a sense of bigger, other-centered purpose. Knowing why what we're doing matters. That pleasure line, that's things like having enough money, having a comfortable job, having the job title, all of those what things and how things. Those don't predict resilience. So this company could do fantastically financially, and it won't make you more resilient. The thing that makes us more resilient is knowing the contribution and focusing on the contribution that resulted in the success. So holding that up is powerful. I always say this, that results push us for the short term, and purpose pulls us. And if you think of a metaphor for this, if you've ever been stuck on the side of the road, how many of you all have called a push truck? No, we don't. We have tow trucks because physically it's easier to lift something and pull it than it is to push something. That's the same when it comes to motivation, motivating ourselves and motivating others. Because the precise problem with being motivated by a result is the fact that you can achieve it. And then what? Well, you have to make another goal, right? And then what? You have to make another goal. And then what? And then people rely on the push. And when the push isn't there, for example, a recession or a market downturn, what's left? People with purpose have, no. How I respond to this is part of this bigger contribution. The object of your behavior is outside of yourself, so it exerts a pulling force on your life and organization that pulls you through. And then it's still there after you're gone. That's why the only way to make a legacy is to contribute to others, not to acquire and achieve, because that ends. Purpose endures. And so when we think about this, like this is typically how I see organizations. I go into companies all the time and they are at a sales meeting and they're firing off cannons, confetti cannons and t-shirts because they met a quarterly goal. And I always start my keynotes for sales teams with, okay, now what? And they all go, ah. And my point when I do that is that we'll always be on the cycle of trying to find the next mountain to climb. There'll always be another mountain. Why are we even starting climbing is the most important part. Because any result, any effect is the result of a cause. That cause is your contribution. I teach college seniors, and they always, I say, the one thing I want you to make sure that you know in your job search is no job exists to pay you. No good hiring manager was like, hey, let's give this person money. Every job exists to solve a human problem or fill a human need. Every job. The best people focus on that cause, that contribution. They trust that the effects and the results will follow. I get LinkedIn messages all the time for people who have in their headline, I'm a results-driven professional. And to be honest, I'm like, I don't care. Results of what? You can't pursue a result for a result's sake, which is what most companies do. They pursue a result, a sales goal, for the goal's sake. But every result is the effect of a cause. That cause is your contribution. That cause is your purpose. So what Broad River Retail is doing is reorienting and creating cause-driven professionals who are obsessed with their contribution and they trust that their results will follow. So if you could help me on LinkedIn create more cause-driven people and add that to your headlines, that would be great and powerful. Because I want people who relentlessly pursue their contribution. And when people do, the results are profound. You know, it's been well documented that organizations are collectively, when they're on purpose, when they're contributing first, they outperform the market by an average of 6-to-1. 58% of purpose-oriented firms experience year-over-year growth at higher rates than firms that are not purpose-oriented. And you'll notice that I don't say have a purpose beyond profit. Because actually having a purpose, just having a purpose statement, does not do anything for performance. Being purposeful is the element that makes this come alive. Because at the end of the day, purposeful people and organizations are productive because they have to be. They're productive because each individual deeply wants to be. Cultivating that want is what being a purposeful leader is all about. And so what I'd like to do is go over 3 of the practices of how do you do this? How do you do this in a day-to-day leadership position? And one of the first ways to do it is to make sure you're instilling and maintaining the belief that the work matters. Instilling and maintaining the belief that the work matters. I do a lot of work in healthcare and education, and people often say to me, well, Zach, they have like a clear purpose. But I always say the good work can become routine work when it's not maintained. When we don't maintain the belief that the work matters. Ensure a clear line of sight to the purpose. I think leaders should be responsible for removing as many barriers as possible so people can see clearly how the task, and I mean the minute task in a day, connects to the bigger purpose. So I think leaders are, one of the jobs of leaders, besides being responsible for the environments in which people spend over 50% of their waking lives in, I think one of the prime responsibilities is they remove barriers to ensure that people can know that they matter and how they matter. And then finally, aligning values and behaviors with that purpose. Because nobody really cares why we say we exist unless we prove it every day. Action is the sole medium of purpose. Action is the only way people know and feel why we exist. And that's how we change people's lives, right? That's how we furnish people's best memories. And so what I want you to do right now is I just want you to take a moment. We're going to talk about this first practice area, instilling and maintaining a belief that the work matters. I want you to think about a moment in which you most believed that your job mattered. You most believe that your job mattered. And if you wake up every day and you're like, my job matters every day, that's fantastic because you literally like the things people sleep on is what you do. I mean, you're part of everybody's every day. But I want you to think about the time, the moment, what was happening, who was around, what was said, what was that specific moment. So if I were to come ask you that, I could be transported into that time by what you say. So I want you to take a minute or two to think about it. And when you're ready, I would just like you to tell that story to the person next to you. When was that moment? And in your folders, there is an exercise, and I have some exercises in there that you can take back to your teams to ask them these questions as well, because this is an incredibly powerful question that we're asked. And I invite you to write down some notes as you're thinking about this in your journal that you got, and then I'll bring you back in about 3 or 4 minutes or so like 1 or 2 minutes per person. Share that story, and then I'll give you a 30-second warning so I don't cut anybody off, and I'll bring that back. So when was the moment in which you most believed that your job mattered? Go for it. All right, so does anybody have one that they'd be willing to share with the larger group? And make sure that you raise your hand so Heather can get a microphone to you. Yeah, go ahead. Let's go right here.
I was in the business of placing temporary professionals for many years. And so I have many of the same moments that I realized it mattered. And that's when, former CFO or accounting manager or somebody that you don't think about typically works in a temporary capacity came in, to my business, having just been laid off, desperate to try and visualize how they were going to earn an income to put food on their table for their family until that next permanent job came along. And so the direction to my team was, we're not just going to go increase business, we're going to help this man or woman put food on the table. And so that purpose really drove our performance, because it was all about that individual coming in seeking your help.
Yeah, and thinking about that person coming in and who counts on that person and who orbits their life. Yeah, it's powerful. How about another person share their story? So someone over here, you had said, I love that story, and I think it was your story. Would you mind sharing it? I don't know why. So here's...
I don't mind sharing it. So,
okay.
It's a great story. I love it.
So, I'm gonna...
If I hear, as I'm facilitating, someone say, I love that story.
Microphone check.
There you
1, 2, 1, 2.
You've done this before, it seems.
I've done it, yes. Yeah. So earlier in the year, Renee, I know she's in here somewhere. There's an orange shirt. Renee was going to be promoted, and I trained in Renee's store as a GM, so I thought about putting my name in the hat for that store. And then I kept thinking about it. I kept thinking about the outlet strategies and how they pertain to not just me, but how they pertain to Broad River, growth pillar. And so in the 11th hour, I pulled my name out of the hat because I felt that my calling was a bigger calling than just me. It was more about the growth of the company and how it can impact more people along the line. I think my team was happy that I decided to not do that.
Wow.
But so that's when I believed that my purpose with the company mattered more on a larger scale. So to stay with the strategy and try to perfect outlet growth.
Wow. Thank you. Sorry I called you out there, but who else has one? Let's do one more. Yeah. Yeah, right over there. But it's fun, so take one,
So for me, it was at the end of 2018. I had been with the company since March in acting as a GM. And I remember being at a senior retail meeting, and we were talking about how do we want to make 2019 our best year. And sitting with my peers, we started collaborating about having these intentional moments. And instead of having a word of the month, like Zippy June, or, we're going to rock it out July, or whatever it was what skills are we going to impart on our people? What actions are we going to take to invest into our teams? And watching it come to life month after month and taking this foundation of skills and watching this idea unfold. And it becomes greater and greater every single month. That was the moment for me that when I said, I'm going to move my family from a place I was comfortable from to an organization, to these leaders who made me believe in an incredible future, that they had a purpose before they even stated what a purpose was. And their enthusiasm drove me here, sitting there looking at these people across the table. And they were so excited about putting this into place for everyone to have the best year of their life and seeing it. That moment was the one that told me that I'm in the right place. We're making an impact on our people. We are changing lives. And that's when I felt like that was the most important moment of my career.
Wow, thank you. Powerful. So I have we'll do one more. Let's do one more. Yeah, go for it.
I was working at a mattress store, and this lady comes by and brings a picture of her spine and herself in a hospital bed and wrote a thank you letter on how wonderful the Tempur-Pedic mattress was, and changed her life. She was actually able to sleep again, helped her.
Oh my gosh. How many thank you letters do you get like that? A lot? How many have you gotten?
It was a lot.
You've gotten a lot of thank you letters?
I worked at the mattress store. I had a whole binder full of this.
That's amazing. Because oftentimes we don't get like a Facebook notification when we change the world, right? Or we don't get a text messages like that. So those holding on to those moments to remind yourself of why the work matters is so important. You know, when I heard your story, I got a little like, oh wow, a little chill. You know, when you get chills when you hear people tell these stories of purpose. That's a little oxytocin dopamine hit that you're getting from thinking about purpose. And if you saw what happened when people shared these stories, people come alive. But I also have another question for you. How many of you all wrote down a story or shared a story that you've never shared before? Raise your hand out loud, that you've never shared before. Okay. How many of you all told a story that you've shared like 3 or fewer times? A good amount. So what I want you to think about is purposeful leaders are not just storytellers, but they're story collectors. They collect these stories and moments of meaning and mattering, and they share them constantly, time after time. That janitor story, that's one of the only like poignant, real, out there stories I have of purpose in action, even though I do this work. So I tell that over and over and over and over and over again. People who hear me speak are like, he's going to tell the janitor story again. Because it's so important to re-center yourself and other people in that moment of mattering. So there's a couple of ways this practice of story collecting and storytelling works. One is people who are purposeful tend to tell themselves these stories when things get tough. Remember that time, remember that person. But they also tell their team members stories of mattering and impact regularly. I'll give an example of just the power of this practice. I was going down to do a session for a large distributor of small widgets that go to a medical device manufacturer that manufactures part of an MRI machine that then sends that part out to another manufacturer that assembles the MRI machine and then gets it out to market. 3-4 steps removed from any end user. I go into this hotel ballroom. I'm just after the chief operating officer just chewed these distribution center managers out for not meeting their quarterly efficiency goals. Here comes the purpose guy. And I go in and it is just, I can't even explain to you. And I always say that when you live by results, you die by results. And what I mean by that is psychologically, this team didn't meet their goal, so they were just dead. You could feel it. And I went in and there was someone sitting right where you're sitting. And not you, but someone sitting right where you're sitting. And this is how bad it was. This guy was literally Googling me as I was coming up. And he turned to the person next to him and goes, oh, I hope this guy's not boring. What people don't understand is that as speakers, we can also hear what you're saying. But that's how bad this environment was. And so I got up, and I was feeling a little bit very East Coast, Northeast that day, which where I'm from. And I said, why are you all here? Why don't you just leave? Like, why don't you can just get in your car and go home. Like, leave the hotel ballroom. Go grab some coffee somewhere. Just leave. Why are you here? And they all perked up. The person who hired me, the supervisor, was glaring at me in the background. And this woman in the back raised her hand. She goes, I've been here for 12 years, and no one's ever asked me why I'm here, apart from what I do or how I do it or what I get for what I do or what I do for the company. No one's ever asked me that before. And then she starts tearing up. And I'm like, I really screwed this up, this whole day up. This is not the intended outcome. So she starts tearing up. And in this moment, she's recalling this story where she said that a month earlier, she had been diagnosed with an early stage cancer. And she was in the MRI machine. And as she was reflecting in the moment about being in the MRI machine, she remembers seeing the brand logo on the MRI machine. And she said, now that I'm thinking about it, I see that logo every day on the boxes in our distribution centers. And she said, I'm realizing right now for the first time, and she said this verbatim. She goes, I'm realizing that my job has existed for the last 12 years to save my own life. You talk about an antidote to employee disengagement. That room changed, just like that. That's all I had. I didn't do anything. That's what she did, and then all of a sudden, people started being like, where do these products go? Who are the people? Like, what are the MRI machines? And then they started taking this down to the front line. So they said, who in our organization has the highest disengagement rates? And it was the frontline distribution center workers that up to that point were a turnover statistic that they lost to wages, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy. that many leaders create. And these people in the distribution center, what they did is they just asked them, what do you hate most about your job? Which is a fun question to ask people. And the distribution center said the distribution center packers said the weekly safety meetings. Everybody, we all have our weekly safety meeting, whatever it is. So all we did differently is 5 minutes at the beginning of the weekly safety meeting. We brought in a customer to tell the story of using an MRI machine, and we highlighted a component widget and how it manifested that customer story. We brought videos in, we showed videos for 5 minutes. All of a sudden, 3 weeks later, there were people who didn't even belong at the safety meetings because they wanted to hear the story. On quarterly Pulse surveys, all we looked at was turnover, we looked at engagement, and slowly engagement started going up. And the only intervention we did, was to show people how they mattered through that story. And it's powerful. It can be so powerful. Like that whole collective in the room when I told that story that, you don't even know these people are this company, right? But purpose activates empathy, which is the engine of everything that what we do. And I want to give you just some research on this. So Adam Grant, who's a researcher at the Wharton School, did a study. What he did is he had some call center employees, and he had a large group of them. There was a shift of about 100 of them. And he took an experimental group, about 50 of them, and all he did was have a scholarship recipient come in and share their story for about 5 minutes. The reason why this is so important is this was at a university. These were hourly call center workers who called people all day long and asked them to donate money to a place that they're already trying to pay back money to. They get told no all day long. It's high turnover, low morale. So he had them come in and tell the scholarship story. The control group he didn't do anything with, and he measured their motivation and output over the next 6 months. And what he found astounded him and his colleagues. The people that heard the story for 5 minutes, on average, everyone was bringing in like $103 per caller per week. After 6 months, the people that heard the story were bringing in over $500 per caller per week, spending double the amount of time on the phone than the control group. Hearing that impact is powerful. But it wasn't just that they heard that one story. It's that they felt the power of stories, and that team started telling more stories to each other. So they would get off the phone from alumni who had a great experience with a building or a major or a professor, and they would tell their team that story in meetings and things like that. So they had created a culture of story collecting and storytelling of impact, which resulted in motivation, engagement, and production. And that study's been replicated in numerous industries. This is Dr. Turner. He's a radiologist in Israel. He works with radiologists who work from home. So they work remotely, and they get scans, and they send the scans back with their interpretive findings, CT scans, MRI machine scans. And what he did is he wanted to know what would happen if he attached the headshot of a patient to a scan. So he took this experimental group, he sent all the scans out. He took this control group, he sent all the scans out, but in the experimental group for each scan, he put the headshot on the scan. And what he was looking for was output, production, quality. And what he found, and what the researchers found, was that those who saw the headshot, on average, wrote 25% longer interpretive findings on their scan reports. And they found 25% more incidental findings that would be important to the patient's future prognosis than those who did not see the headshot. So you know that whole adage of putting a face to the name? Purposeful leaders constantly bring the face, the impact. They put a life to whatever product, service, task other people are doing. And one of the ways to do that is through storytelling. So one tip here is to regularly reflect on your moments of mattering. How many of you have asked that question of yourself every week? When have I experienced most a sense of purpose this week? The one that we did at the beginning. How many of you have asked that regularly? So if you don't remember anything from this presentation, do that. Reflect on these moments of mattering. When you've had a difficult day at work, instead of how do we mostly end our days and end our shifts, we say, oh gosh, what went wrong? How can I make sure that doesn't go wrong tomorrow? That's not really a psychologically motivating way to leave work and to live. So instead, at the end of each day, say, where's a moment where I most felt like I mattered today? Ask your people that as you're leaving shifts. In fact, there's research that finds that we have a remembering self and an experiencing self. So what we experience last in a day about work is typically how we generally appraise work. So if you have to give negative feedback to somebody, do it before lunch If you have to give positive feedback and want to tell stories of mattering, do it towards the end of the day. And over time, people come to have that appraisal that, yes, I do matter. Find moments where you can tell stories. And what I mean by this is it's going to be a stressful time. You don't have much time. You're not going to sit down and be like, all right, everybody, story time. Gather around. But it's in small moments, like when your team is stressed out, right, or something. You can say, hey, just remember, like that. Remember I told you the story about that woman who came in with that picture of her in that hospital? That's why we're stressed right now. Simple, little things like that. Or when you're giving feedback to somebody or giving positive feedback, how do you tell someone they did a good job? How do you do it? Great job. So that's actually not psychologically motivating for people. Really, it isn't. Like, you can say good job. Instead of telling people they did a good job, show them the difference they made. Through a story, show them the difference they made. So if they did a good job with a customer, don't just say, hey, good job with that customer. Say, did you see that customer walk away smiling? Think about where they're going, what they're doing. This is part of their day. They drove here, they came in here. Think about that. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for serving that customer in that way. Just that shift can reconnect people to impact. It's a very small thing, right? But purposeful leaders have a habit of doing that. They always show people why the work matters. They show people the difference that they make. They're meaning givers. They give people their meaning. They show people how they matter. And this is really important when you're delegating as well. Before you tell people what to do or how to do it, make sure you vividly show them why it matters. You can just take an inventory of, and oftentimes we're like, we don't have time for that. You do have time for that. Just flip what you talk about. Just say, hey, we're doing this so that. Add those two words, so that this, and provide a human impact. Whether it's peer-to-peer or for the organization, so that this, here's how you need to do it, and here's what you need to do. So then if the person's like, oh gosh, I really don't want to do that to make sure this person has a comfortable place to sleep tonight. It's really difficult psychologically to say that. So if you want to incite motivation and inspiration before you tell people what to do or how to do it, make sure you show them why it matters. When you have a new team member, which I'm sure you're doing here, I think the first person they should talk to, if you can, is a customer in any company. The best onboarding tool is the human being at the end of the supply chain. That's the best sense of onboarding because there's 3 elements of all human behavior. We have to want to do it, we have to know how to do it, have the ability, and the environment has to remind us to do it. Most organizations focus on how to do it. Make sure these people can do this. Give them the binder. Make sure they know when to be here, what to say, where to show up, what the sales philosophy is, the tactics, all of that. As robustly as you maintain the abilities in your organization, do you as robustly maintain the motivation? Maintain the motivation, the want. Storytelling is one way to do that. Another way to do that for you is to relate and re-perceive how everyday small tasks have a human impact. Research finds that we'll spend about 60% of our day on routine, mundane things. Author Annie Dillard said, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. So how we spend and think about those routine moments is actually how we appraise and think about our careers and our work. Things like it's answering email or just doing the thing you do every day, talking to the same person every day. Those are the moments that actually comprise the majority of our lives. We look for the big achievements, the purpose summits, the things like that. But those are very rare in reality to the everyday moments. So how can you re-perceive the everyday moments? We'll do an experiment right here, right now. What is something you don't like doing in your job? And it's okay. There's no judgment from supervisors or leaders here. Honesty is great. What's something you don't like doing? Okay. Getting yelled at? Okay. Yeah, Charlie? Charlie. I'm going to use Charlie as an example. This is great. So Charlie, I want you to think about this. So performance reviews, you don't like doing that. Now I want you to ask yourself this question. What would happen to another human being if you did not do it?
Well, they would not get a raise.
But what would happen to them?
They would not receive feedback about the work that they do, the good job that they do.
Yeah, and why is that important?
that would help motivate them and encourage them intrinsically.
Yeah. And I know I've gotten to talk to Charlie. And Charlie, you don't wake up every day and be like, you know what, I'd rather not intrinsically motivate people today. Right?
Correct.
But yet what happens is when we're faced with these tasks that become routine to us, the very task that helps us deliver our purpose to intrinsically motivate people, because of the nature of the task, because it's not as feel good as like doing all the things that we want to be doing, we tend to think of it as routine and mundane. But it's usually the very thing that has enabled us to deliver our task. I'll give an example. I was working with a big hospital team, and I said, what's one thing you don't like doing in your job? And this one person in the front said, payroll. I hate running payroll. And then this other people around them said, yeah, payroll. And I said, well, what would happen to another human being if you didn't do it? And people were like, well, we wouldn't have doctors. And someone said, we wouldn't have a hospital. And they were kind of laughing a little bit. And I said, what department are you in? And they all collectively groaned, payroll. Literally, the function of their job became so routine and mundane and disconnected and depersonalized from the purpose that they came to hate this task. I was talking to a group of mechanics for a school district. And the purpose guy, mechanics, is great. And I come in, and this guy stands up after, and he says, Zach, I like your nice little talk. But no matter what you say, I will hate sweeping the buses when they come in at the end of the day. And I said, oh, okay, what's your name? He said, Bob. And I said, Bob, I said, what would happen to another human being if you didn't do it? And he was sitting in a row of other mechanics. And they all said, Bob, we would have to do it. And I said, how would you all feel? And they'd be like, pissed, frustrated. And I said, Bob, did you wake up today wanting to frustrate people? And he said, no, and he stormed off. Well, he signed up for my email list. And I sent a newsletter out, and he emailed me back, and he said, expletive you, Zach. Yeah, expletive you, Zach. I can't think about sweeping the buses the same ever again, Bob. And this is what happens. And this is what can happen. This is called job crafting. And what it is reframing our perceptions of our work every day to ask that question. Think about that thing and ask yourself, what would happen to a human being if I didn't do it? Do that for your people. When you know they're struggling with a task, be like, what would happen at the end of the line to a person if we did not do this? If you weren't there for someone to yell at you, what would happen to someone else? They would yell at someone else. Like, can you imagine, like, what greater purpose than to be someone who takes that on and helps comfort, someone who's angry than what you're doing, right? So if you take captive your approach, it's powerful. So this is a way to re-perceive, and research finds that when we job craft over time, we can do this. Now, it takes a long time, because you may be sitting to yourself if you're doing something like an Excel spreadsheet or something, and you're like, it's going to sound pretty cheesy to be like, how does this impact a human being today? And you do that, but do it. Usually the cheesiest things in life are the things that are most true, because that Excel sheet matters to somebody else. And so thinking about that every day is powerful. Make it a habit in how you lead yourself. The second is what you all have been really good at, is ensuring a clear line of sight to the purpose, to the bigger purpose. And John F. Kennedy was launching the Apollo missions to the moon, and he went into a space center. And he wrote about this in his memoirs. And when he went in, he, by accident, went into a mop closet. He thought it was a green room to prep for his talk. And he went in, and he saw this custodian wringing out a mop. And he said, as the president, hey, what do you do here? And the janitor very calmly said, oh, Mr. President, I'm putting a man on the moon. And then he went back to his work. And it just shocked him. You know that famous dictum, right? It's not what your country can do for you, it's what you can do for your country. When we transcend to a bigger purpose, it came from interactions as small as that one. And we may be like, oh, wow, that's a great story. But imagine this janitor getting up. And this is the difference between knowing a purpose and believing it. Imagine him getting up on Monday morning. He needs some hashtag Monday motivation. I just did that. Hashtag Monday motivation, which is actually a trending thing, which is sad. It's amazing how many people live for the weekends or 2/7 of their lives. But anyway, so he gets up on Monday morning. Imagine being like, darn it. Gosh, here we go. Another day. I got to go to work today and put a person on the moon. Ugh. Or it's Wednesday, hump day. Only 3 more days left of putting a man on the moon. Can't wait for the weekend. You can know a mission statement and hate Mondays. It's almost psychologically impossible to believe in another centered purpose and wish it was Friday. It's almost impossible psychologically to believe that you exist to furnish somebody, some human being's best memories. And it wasn't by accident. NASA had what they called a ladder to the moon on every department across the 300,000 people, from truckers to seamstresses who sewed the parachutes to anybody who worked on this project across the globe. Everybody had to have a ladder to the moon as a management principle, which they could connect their daily task to the bigger purpose and state it regularly. And so when we think about stating purpose, there are two types of purpose. There's individual purpose, which is why me. There's organizational purpose, which is why this. And then the common purpose is why us. You'll see with your imperative profiles that each of you has a distinct, different purpose statement. It's different. Your purpose is like your fingerprint. It's how you deliver the bigger organizational purpose. And so the big question to answer is, apart from what you do, how you do it, or what you get in return for what you do, why are you here? Why do you exist? And this is hard when you really break this apart. Apart from what you do, the things you know how to do, how you do it, your best practices, or what you get in return for what you do, the results, the paycheck, the benefits, why are you here? And the answer to that question is your purpose. And purpose tends to come from three things: your passions, the things that you love to do. So if you were to think about your day today, ask yourself this question at the end of the day: what did I love doing that day? Love doing is like you didn't even really think about it. You just did something and it's like, oh, I just love that. And then ask yourself, why did I love that? What did I love about that? And then talents. This is what you're good at. Sometimes in the world of personal development, we focus on strengths. And sometimes that's code word for competencies like skills. But a true strength is where a passion, what you love to do, overlaps with what you're good at. Because you could be really good at something, but it drains the life out of you. And so what happens is that if we have skills without the energy to use them, they're useless. Purposeful leaders cultivate that energy, that passion regularly. So passion, talent, and then finally impact. What's the direction of all of this? Anytime you use your strengths or your resources, or what Imperative calls your purpose drivers, to impact another human being, you're on purpose. So what's the direction? Without either of these, it's tough to be purposeful. It's tough for people to be purposeful. For example, skills without the energy to use them are useless. Passion without the skills to bring it to life is just trapped energy. Both without an impact is just self-serving. When it all comes together, it's legacy. Contribution is legacy because it outlasts you. So how do you use your drivers to make an impact? Here's an example of what you all have. What's your purpose statement? What's your purpose statement? Yeah. You don't know it by heart anymore. What's yours?
You mean this here?
Yeah.
I am individual, karma, community.
Those are your drivers. Cool. What's your purpose statement? Okay, here's what's cool about this day, right? And the imperative stuff. I was walking into someone's consulting engagement, and they said that we've done the golden circle stuff. Simon Sinek, we watched the TED Talk. We have our why statements. I said, what is it? This person said, Barry, can you go get that from the office? This is not an exercise, right? Purpose can't be an exercise. Just like that janitor, my goal for you at the end of this day, at the end of the work you do with Imperative, the end of the work that you do as a company, is that if I ask what's your purpose statement, it's putting a man on the moon. It's part of your everyday language. I call the other thing mission statement speak, where we have to you go in and you say, what's your mission statement? And everybody kind of pauses. And then they look and read it, kind of. When it's part of your DNA, it just is. It's like you wake up and how you greet somebody. It just is. So being very comfortable with your language of purpose is really important. We're here to furnish people's best memories. Life's best memories. That's it. That's what we're doing. This is why we're here. Here's how we're going to do it. So being very comfortable with this statement is incredibly powerful. So I encourage you really in your purpose pauses today and as you go through the imperative work to remember that to bring this to life, it has to be part of the everyday conversation, because one of the best ways to support belief is to make purpose part of your environment. Those symbols of purpose, which I know one of our later speakers today is going to be talking about. This is the template that I use. My purpose is to inspire people and organizations to discover and enact their purpose so that they'll thrive. I mean, the research says that purpose is the driver of these positive outcomes like fulfillment, satisfaction, motivation in our lives. So this is how I conceptualize it. It's like Mad Libs. How do you use your strengths on who to think, feel, and do what? But no matter who you state it with, imperative, anybody else, the key is that you connect what you're good at, what you love to do, your drivers, with impact. And that's when we're on purpose. At the end of your purpose statement, I encourage you to add "so that" at the end of it. So that together we can furnish life's best memories. So that together we can furnish life's best memories. This is an example of what I called with regard to laddering. So like I said, that janitor didn't just come up by accident and say that because they were especially purposeful. Every department at NASA in archival studies had a ladder to the moon. You have this in your packets for a Keynote supplement that I included there. So every day when people came in, whether they were the custodians, the physicists, the engineers, the truck driver, or the parachute seamstresses, they would come in and say, what's the task we're working on today? What's the tangible, measurable objective that'll help complete? What's the next tangible, measurable objective? And then how will that help us put a person on the moon? So when somebody comes in, how is what I'm going to do today going to have a measurable impact? What's the next measurable impact? And then how will that help to furnish somebody's best memories? Being able to do this regularly is powerful. You can use this in two ways. One is to delegate when you're delegating. The other is communicating. I often study how CEOs and leadership communicate change. And almost it's always a justification for how we need to do what we need to do. But you can reverse this ladder and say, hey, remember, this is why we exist. Here's an objective we need to fulfill that. Here's another objective we need to make that happen. Here's what I need you to do. You emotionally connect people to it early and then deliver the task. You can use this a couple of different ways. You have this template in your workbook, so you can think about that task you don't like doing and use this, and it's powerful. This is Justin. He is a GM of a car wash that I work with. I have a lot of examples like Microsoft and others, but I wanted to give you an example of someone who didn't realize as a company they had a purpose. And this is Justin. He works for a car wash, and we met, and he said, Zach, we wash cars. I mean, that's what we do. We wash cars. He couldn't figure it out. And I said, well, what human problem do you exist to solve? You know, that's a great question to ask yourself. What human problem do I exist to solve? Or what do you want people's lives to be better? How do you want people's lives to be better because of you? Because you were. And he was all like, oh, I don't know. He called me, he wanted to meet again. He goes, Zach, I realized nobody wants to work at a car wash. Nobody wakes up and wants to work at a car wash. In fact, everybody we hire, they may not have their GED. They may just be graduating high school. And then it's our job to prepare them for their future. Our job is to prepare people for their future. And so what they did was they started creating personal development plans where people put their life goal and they matched every task that they did to how that will help them achieve that life goal. That educational path. They have options for 401ks. They just started with employee housing that they offer people, affordable housing for their employees, right? Because he said if this is our purpose, we have to have people need a place to live. So their purpose was to prepare people for the future. But what we also did is we said, why don't we look at why people get their cars washed? So we asked them. Have you ever done that? Like, do you do that with your customers? Do you ask them, hey, why are you looking for a chair? Like, you know, thinking about those stories is really powerful because we started asking. One of the first people said, oh, I'm getting my car washed because my daughter, she's the first in our family to go to college, and I want to make sure my car looks nice when I drop her off. We had other people going to graduations. We had one woman who said, sadly, that her brother-in-law had passed away, and they needed to sell the car on Craigslist in order for her to pay her rent. And she was there washing the car. When people in service professions like yours, you are part of the cadence of people's everyday lives, the routines of everyday lives, right? And we often can sometimes forget that in the processes. So Justin said, well, we provide for the community then. And so this is their purpose, to prepare people for the future and provide for the community. But then they went further and activated it. Their KPI was that 80% of all of their employees, car wash attendants, will be retained for at least 1 year. 80%. Did they meet that yet? No. But since they stated it, they went from 30% to almost 60%. They stated that purpose. They wash over 1 million cars per year. Now, what's great about my job is that I get to study all these other occupations. And in this industry, 315,000 cars is on average for a 5-tunnel car washing system. They do 3 times that. Now, why, right? Because this is the result of purpose, not the purpose. People from all over the world come and try to work at Breeze Through Car Wash. They're the only car wash that had this journey where they said, we prepare people for the future. People are trying to copy that now. But I always say this, people can copy what you do or how you do it, but they can't copy why you are. They can't copy why you are and how you deliver this purpose. The people in this room is you are the ultimate competitive advantage for Broad River Retail. You're the ultimate competitive advantage. Your belief in this purpose is the ultimate competitive advantage. People can state it, but only you can do it the way you're doing it. Your purpose statement so that together we can furnish life's best memories. A couple of tips here. Craft a statement and keep it visible. Make sure that statement that you create is visible as many times in your day as you can see it. Read it at the beginning and end of each day. Read it especially when you don't want to read it. What I mean by that is that you have a really bad day, you have a rough day, you just got yelled at. Go back and just read it to yourself. Read it to yourself. It is so powerful to build mindset, the stories we tell ourselves. Make this part of that story you tell yourself. Connect that purpose to Broad River's purpose. Add that so that. How does my purpose help deliver and furnish life's best memories? And then use that laddering tool to connect those tasks to the bigger purpose. And purposeful leaders make it part of the daily discussion. I was just with the car wash, and they were training people on how to go through and fix some component in the tunnel. And we went through, and the supervisor asked the person, hey, remind me what you wanted to do with your life again? And he went in and showed her how that would help her. She wanted to go be a dancer, go to dancing school. How to show her how optimizing this process would help her optimize her own process of practicing and would help her to be a dancer. They talked about that as they're learning the task. That's purpose in action, right? Laddering. How do you connect that to the bigger purpose? And then finally, I want to leave you with this, is to align your values and actions with purpose. So instill and maintain the belief that the work matters through storytelling. Make sure people know why it matters before you tell them what to do or how to do it. State your purpose. Connect everything to that purpose and then to the bigger purpose. And then make sure you prove it every day. Because again, no one cares why you say you exist unless you prove it. Like, I love all this stuff. Are you kidding me? People in purpose shirts, this is like blowing my mind. But nobody cares about your shirt unless you prove it every day. And that comes through action. And I want to show you one example of a company that's been doing this really consistently since its inception. And it's ironically the only profitable, sorry for the partial nudity here, but it's the only profitable airline that's been consistently profitable since their inception in Southwest. And the story of Southwest is that Herb Kelleher, who was the founder who passed away recently, was in a San Antonio bar and he was thinking about business ideas. But the question he asked that was the impetus of their business was this: why can only 15% of Americans afford to fly? It was initially to solve a human problem. The solution was a low-cost airline. The result was profit. But the human problem that existed to solve was what Southwest's core purpose is now: to democratize the skies, to provide access to air travel across the socioeconomic spectrum. Fast forward to 2010, post-recession. What did airlines start doing? Charging for bags. Consultants came into Gary Kelly, who's the current CEO's office, and they said, okay, shareholders are really mad because you're leaving $300 million on the table every year because you're not charging for bags. We have a great plan for you to charge for bags. Gary Kelly stopped. One of the things that I hope that today will do for you and that this session will do for you was it'll implant your own why-asking toddler in your brain that helps you stop and pause. And he stopped and he took a walk and he saw the napkin that Herb Kelleher wrote that question on. And he went back into the room and he said, we are not charging for bags and we won't ever charge for bags. And he told his leadership team, by the way, I need you to go find $300 million. They ended up finding over $700 million in cost-cutting efficiency initiatives without cutting a single position, post 9/11, post-recession. They also ended up starting the Bags Fly Free campaign, which was basically saying, hey, we're going to be captivated by our purpose, not distracted by our competition. And they doubled down on purpose. And they ended up netting an additional $1 billion of revenue off of this Bags Fly Free campaign. Just to give you an idea of how purpose is such the boss of leadership decision-making there, is just last year, if you remember, Southwest stopped giving peanuts on flights. Now they give little, like, small stale pretzels, which are great, but they stopped giving peanuts on flights. And it was because Southwest officials were getting emails from parents who were nervous about flying with their kids that had peanut allergies. Now they said, we have to eliminate that barrier to flying. It's not part of our core purpose. Now the reason why this was such a big deal is because if anybody knows anything about Southwest Airlines, their #1 best-selling book by Herb Kelleher is called Nuts. Their branding department was all based on this idea of giving away free peanuts. That was what they were based on. But they said, no, we're going to not give away peanuts. It was just as simple to make a decision like that. So my big question for you is your purpose the boss of your decision making? Purpose should be our ultimate boss, the boss of our strategic decisions, the boss of our actions. Ask yourself, what would my purpose have me do here? Customers coming and yelling in your face, what would my purpose say? Did I respond to them in a way that delivers this? Because when that happens, it becomes very powerful. So make purpose your ultimate boss. And here are the values that you already have. You already have these guardrails. I call them guardrails for purpose. They're the things that keep you on purpose. So having these discussions with yourself, as Charlie alluded to, every day of how you actually do this through behaviors is powerful. So a couple of tips here as we close. Develop a clear, purposeful leadership vision. And I'm going to give you a tool to do that and show you a template that you can use in your workbook. Identify the behaviors that express those values. And I encourage you to do this individually too, because the company has core values. But I encourage you to find your values, your purpose values, that if you were living by these things, you would be on purpose regularly. And then reflect daily. Was I purposeful today? Was I on purpose? Did I deliver this every day? And so to do a very simple visioning exercise, and I encourage you to do this on your own, because it's really personal to think about, but just think about that purpose statement you wrote down, that imperative purpose statement, and ask yourself, if I were delivering this every day, how would I and others feel? Write down 5 feeling qualities that you have, just one column piece of paper. This is the template in your workbook in your folder. For example, if I were inspiring people and organizations to discover and enact their purpose, I and others should feel inspired. Then for each of those feeling qualities, write down who you would have to be. So how you would need to show up every day. Being is your mindset, your way of being with people. If people were to feel inspired and I were to feel inspired, well, I would need to be appreciative, right? If I were to feel inspired, I would need to be appreciative of what I have. For each of those being qualities, in the third column, write down an action, a measurable action that will say, if someone came into, I think about this all the time, if someone came into my office, they were looking at me, they had a checklist, and they're saying, yeah, this guy's being appreciative. What would they see me doing? For example, I would need to reflect daily on the positive impact of my work. So here's how powerful this is. These become your values that keep you on purpose. These become your key behavioral indicators of your purpose. And these become the result of being on purpose. The reason why this is so powerful is that you can easily diagnose problems very quickly. Hey, I'm not feeling inspired today. Gosh, well, was I being appreciative? Did I reflect on my positive impact today? I almost always find that when you're not feeling this, you're not doing that. And so this is a powerful vision. You can do this template. It's a very easy discussion to, just the way I just did it, it's a very easy discussion to facilitate. It's a very, very powerful and profound way to vision. Most of the times, even in our personal lives, especially around January, we say, I want this next year to feel like this. That's often where visioning stops. We often don't get to, who do I need to be to feel that? And what do I need to do to prove that I'm being that to feel that? This is how purpose gets activated. And then, finally, how do you measure that? And do you reward yourself for it? Do you hold people accountable for it? Because what we reward is ultimately who we become. And so if we reward for helpful behaviors and purposeful behaviors, we become purposeful. So a couple of things to recap: instill and maintain the belief that the work matters, ensure a clear line of sight to the purpose, and then align values and behaviors with purpose. And don't forget that no matter what's going on today or what's going on in your life, that you had a 1 in 400 quadrillion chance of being able to think about what's going on with your day. And that's powerful. And so I want to take a minute to thank you all for really, Charlie was a little bit modest, but I've been working with a lot of companies, and I have not seen an in-company day dedicated to purpose, ever. And so I really think that you're at the forefront of what needs to happen in the future of work and workers. And so I'm going to turn it over to Heather. Or do we have any time for Q&A? I know
Yeah.
Let's do Q&A, and you can ask me whatever you'd like to ask me. There's the Q&A slide. Thanks, Lindsay.
Great presentation. What are the most common missteps that you see from organizations who look to implement something like this?
Yeah. The common missteps is that, so first of all, purpose is usually espoused. So they will say it, they'll do the identity work. They typically don't identify the values. They typically don't identify the behaviors. But then the biggest misstep that people make, even when they get into the behaviors, is that the key is to turn those behaviors into habits, right? Habit is, as you all know because you've been studying habits, but habits are created because they're rewarded. So until organizations are willing to change reward structures to reward for contribution-centered behavior generally won't be pursued. Like an example is the example is Wells Fargo, the Wells Fargo case, right? They opened millions of fraudulent accounts. They also spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I can go back and I can get you a cache of their website where it says our culture of caring. They had this big purpose initiative. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on rolling this out. But the problem is they were still rewarding people for self-serving rewards and wanted people to be helpful. So you can't reward people for self-serving behaviors if you want them to be purposeful. A sales leader came to me and said to me, "Zach, these people don't collaborate on my team." And I said, "Oh, cool. Can you show me your reward structure?" And there was no reward for collaborating. They were rewarded for, their quotas, their sales goals, their targets, their commissions. And so if you want people to be contribution-centered, you have to reward them for helpful behaviors. That's a big mistake. Yeah.
So in your book, you talked about the moment with the cab driver.
Yeah.
So how was that so impactful to really be the why of why you're standing here today?
So I was in an advertising position, my first job out of college, because people told me that I needed to have the starting salary to be worth something. That's how I essentially picked all of my majors for what it would look like to have that job, opposite of purposeful. And I left this job because all they focused on was targets, quotas, sales goals in our meetings. It was so I was just like, what about the people that I'm out there meeting? These clients that are their dream is to open these businesses. And so I went and I needed to decompress, and I was at lunch and I saw this cab driver. He was standing next to me. And in Washington, D.C., where I worked, you don't make small talk on the weekday. It's kind of like a thing. So he got out and said, "Hey, how's it going?" And I was like, oh gosh, what should I say? So I went through what I thought I should say, and I said, oh man, is it almost the weekend yet? It was literally Tuesday at the time, which is so embarrassing, right? It is so embarrassing, I think, how human beings spend their time. I go in break rooms for companies all the time, and I just listen to what people talk about. They talk about last weekend or the weekend coming up. They damn the bureaucracy or a supervisor. And I still have to say, what you talk about is who you are. And I was disturbed by that. And I was disturbed that I said that now. But I expected him to just grumble with me, and he didn't. I said, how are you doing? He goes, I'm great. And you know those people you meet just on an everyday basis, they just exude that joy? He just smiled and said, I'm great. I remember he's smoking a cigarette, and he put the cigarette out, and he goes, I'm like people's parents they don't have. I'm their friends people never talk to. I get to talk to new people every half an hour and drive them really fast around the nation's capital. You can't, that's what he said to me. And he goes, you can't beat that. And he got in his cab and drove away, and I was like, I want to be a cab driver. But really what it was is he didn't say, my life is awesome, I'm a cab driver. He talked about what he got to do through being a cab driver. And I was like, man, there's got to be a better way. It's got to be a better way to work. So I became obsessed with figuring out what that better way was. And he, a purposeful person, is the only reason why I'm standing right here. One purposeful person. I don't even know his name. The other thing to think about is that it's not some grand thing. You may say something to someone today that dramatically changes the trajectory of their whole life, and it may be your purpose. That may be it. That may be the most profound thing you do with your life is what you say to someone else today that inspires them to keep going. And I think we have to be okay with that and good with that our contribution, one of the things that's certain about every single day that I've found in my life is that there's an opportunity to contribute. With all the uncertainties, there's always an opportunity.
Any more questions for Zach? Okay. Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I appreciate it.